Hey, what's going on, guys? Taxation is theft, as it is every other day. But today, I've got with me a special guest. Please
Hey, how you
welcome
doing?
Matt Piña. How's it going?
It's going great. How you been?
Pretty good.
That's
Um,
great.
so, so Matt's a good friend from San Antonio. We worked on a couple pretty cool campaigns and projects down there. Um, and now he's running for Texas Land Commissioner. So that's and as he was just telling me, it's kind of an interesting position that you're running for because it's one of these where what well, why don't you just tell me what is it?
Well, there's a lot to it. I would say though the basic thing that the General Land Commission does is control public lands. It makes sense. This is one of the few positions I think in Texas where the name actually means what it says. And we were just talking about that, how you get Texas Railroad Commission has nothing to do with railroads, but the actual General Land Commission does control public lands, and what that means is it has a modernization of it'll have the lands, it'll find some way to make money off of it, and then use it towards what we call the permanent public school fund, which I find libertarians should actually take a little bit more interest in. And the reason on this is because this is a way to fund schools without actually having to tax anybody in the process, which is, to me, such an interesting way, because now the General Land Commission holds $38 billion worth of assets that they can't touch, but the money that's generated from that, they most certainly can and use that towards schools. So I think it's such an interesting, and actually it's the oldest position in the state of Texas. It was formed when we were still a republic, and they kept it on once we, became a state, and now it holds and handles a multitude of things other than just public lands. So it's, I think I'm finding out more and more out about the position every day.
It is just like everything else in government. It will continue to grow, and I
what
mean,
Well, you mentioned that. That's actually one of the things I'd really love to do is to actually really downsize. I've always told people, so you always have organizations that are designed to regulate, and it's I think I'd like to create one that's just sole purpose is deregulation. But before you know it, it'd be regulated. So who knows whether that would actually work?
right. Yeah, that's it's pretty funny. It in a very sad way. But
Yeah.
let's. I want to talk about so something you mentioned is we're always trying to figure out ways to without government, who's going to build the roads or who's going to pay for the without taxes, how are we going to pay for the roads? But
Mhm.
you already mentioned that there's some sort of there's income from the assets that this organization that this department is holding, and of course this income is it's not so much a tax. Some of it's a tax, but I think, but some of it's more like voluntary, right? So like you've got I guess like that controls the state parks, right? And
Yeah,
which
so
bring
all
in.
the state parks, the coastline, Texas is in a unique position. So when we were a state, obviously we're a nation, and so we controlled actually out to 10 miles out into sea. So when we were rolled into the United States, we attained autonomy over that 10 miles versus other states only have two. So that's why you'll see a lot of oil rigs up and down the coastline, is because the General Land Commission will determine whether we're going to give access to mineral rights along with the Texas Railroad Commission. These are some of the things that these try to do, regulate and get these organizations out. But really, the General Land Commission has to ask itself, how do we balance environmental issues with generating money at the same time? So you're really kind of looking at a way to kind of balance both. And what's kind of neat is because they can use those assets in really many different ways, and sometimes it's used really well, and sometimes it's used extremely poorly, which gets into some of the other issues that I think we're facing this particular election. So most notably the Alamo.
Yeah. Well, and so let's talk about that because you mentioned that there's a really big project that I guess the city's trying to work on with the Alamo, where they want to, I mean, they just want to dump like a ridiculous amount of money on it for something that it sounds like nobody is really interested in spending money on.
Well, yeah. Well, there's a larger picture, and I think kind of a scheme at play. So the General Land Commission office is saying that they're going to create this project of $400 million in order to renovate and redo the Alamo Plaza.
That's eight
Now,
zeros, right?
I do believe so. Yes, 400 million. I said that right. Yes. There's actually been some speculation that it might go up to 600 million. But 200 of that would be donated, which, as a libertarian, I'm okay with the donated funds. But uh, I've learned, if there's anything I've learned, is that the project will start at a certain ticket price and most certainly end at a very different one.
Right, when they
So,
got you by the balls and they're like, "Well, we already spent 400 million on this. I mean, if we don't raise another 400 million, we're just going to throw the first 400 million in the trash."
it's just, to me, this is almost like a Bradley tank waiting to happen. Um, for the for those who don't know about the Bradley tank was a disaster of
That was the
congressional oversight.
that was they made the movie out of that, right? The Pentagon Wars.
Yeah, with Kelsey Grammer.
Yeah, that was
If you, I recommend it for every libertarian list. If you've never watched the film, it's worth a watch.
it's hard to believe it's a true story.
Oh yeah. Well, my dad was a veteran, and he always tells me, it's like, yeah, I remember that. His words, I remember that damn vehicle. Couldn't see out the damn porthole. So, and it's a light, heavy reconnaissance vehicle that drives like a tank, but with the armaments of a light vehicle, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, and then let's put a helicopter thing on top of it and
yeah,
make it
I
fly
forgot
too.
It's bad. Okay, but anyways, I digress. But going back to the Alamo here, yeah. So it's a project that. So the GLO, which is General Land Commission Office, actually owns the Alamo. Now the difficulty about this is they've actually never upkept the Alamo. That was actually held by a private organization called Daughters of the Republic of Texas, and that organization has been handling it for a long time. In fact, the Alamo itself would not be in the condition that it's currently in had it not been for those wonderful women donating their private time and really fundraising to keep that thing going. So the only difference is that the GLO was always supposed to just monitor, saying, okay, well, we ultimately own the structure, and that was really just to prevent, it's not really supposed to be a political site. It's supposed to be a historical one, which is kind of sad that it's gotten in this particular setting. But there's many different issues with it as long as the project goes. And I call it the gentrification of the Alamo. And what I mean by that is because there's San Antonio has its own unique set of politics. And for those who don't know, I'm sure you can guess, San Antonio is a pretty liberal city. And so many of the people that are here, they think kind of big picture. Well, unfortunately, there's a lot of poor families that are actually pretty close to the Alamo, and they're being forced out right now. And so Cheryl Scully, who is our city manager, is actually the highest paid city manager in the United States. So between her and her husband, I believe they clear like 1.2 million out of the city's pocket every year.
Nice.
Yeah, good for them. I suppose. But I honestly think that the city has jeopardized certain types of things, like we can compare police officers, for example, compared to the national average. I believe if you look at per person, the San Antonio is down like 200 police officers, which I know many of us libertarians kind of abhor, kind of police brutality. But San Antonio actually has a very good police force compared to other places. I've traveled all over the world. Many of our police officers are minorities, so they don't really kind of stereotype, I think, where you get other places. But as far as they're concerned, they really try to go out and help the community, which is such an odd perspective, I think, in my experience going throughout the United States. So anyways, not to get into that, but I will say that as far as the Alamo goes, it's this land is being developed kind of so that I think so they can sell the land around it that's privately held at a higher rate than what they were getting before. And that's what I really think's going on. Because we have tons of people out there protesting. In fact, I went to a protest this Saturday, and everyone's saying like, let's not let this project happen, and it's still going through. And I think that's the travesty that's happening here. That I think the very vocal voice of the common man is being ignored, and I think that's
So how are I guess there's kind of a lot of questions to go around with that, but um, like how are they trying to take this land from? You said there's a lot of people who kind of live around there. Um, like because I know like everyone's got different tactics. They'll either just make it uncomfortable until someone has to sell. They'll use eminent domain. What kind of stuff? What kind of shady stuff is going on here to kind of kick these people out of their homes?
Oh my God, everything. There's not a single trick in the book that's not being held. So, I mean, they've used eminent domain to take some of the buildings already around the Alamo directly. Now, these are private businesses that were there, that've been there either for a year, and sometimes they're, um, they're not really great businesses to have out front, but they're not bad businesses either. I think if it's your own private land, you're not hurting anyone else. Do what you want. Um, Now, so there's been some argument that from some of the conservatives that are there, they're like, they're okay with that. Of course, conservatives are okay with property rights being taken over when
Right.
it fits their perspective. But, being libertarian, I'm most certainly not okay with that. And so they're going to kick out those businesses. A lot of those people don't even know that this is happening because the only people who are made aware are the owners, and the owners aren't really going out and telling their employees, well, they're going to move us in a year, and you may or may not have a job during that time once their lease expires. And I've talked to some of these people, and they just instantly get nervous. Like, what do you mean I'm not going to be working here right next to the Alamo? Um, they just don't know that this is happening, and I think that's really been the biggest play from the General Land Commission office. Is there's been a real big downplay on the issue. In fact, George P. Bush signed a document saying that the Alamo, the silhouette of the Alamo, the words "Remember the Alamo" or anything associated with the Alamo could not be used by any private organization or for political purpose.
Wait, what?
Yes, I'm serious.
Wait,
I'm
hold on, hold
serious.
on. Say that one more time just so I can digest that properly.
Okay, so he made it to where the silhouette. So everybody knows this, the little archway of the Alamo.
Right?
So you can't use that in any image without the express notification of the General Land Commission office. You can't use the phrase "the Alamo." You can't use Alamo in any type of private product, or even say "Remember the Alamo." In any type of publication or or situation without the general express okay from that office. And it's, to me, this is just outrageous and
Okay,
ridiculous.
hold on. Is there so many questions are going through my head. Is there a grandfather clause in there for like Alamo Rent a Car or like all these other businesses that are already Alamo something?
So sort of. Yes, but they still can revoke it, and they have tried. Uh, Failed pretty miserably. The judge just okay. So for those who aren't from San Antonio, um, we put the Alamo on everything. I mean, that's just our baby here, uh, and so we make it very certain that that's just how we let other Texans know where we're from. We just go, oh, we're the Alamo City, or we all our organizations have it. So of course, when this got in front of the judge, he just kind of looked at him like, are you insane? Like, no, that makes no sense because we all use it. And yeah, I don't know how else to express it. To me, it's just ridiculous. I use it anyways. If the GLO wants to come stop me, yeah, throw an injunction. Come throw an injunction on me. Sure, that's fine. But I think you'll be making my point about about the disidentification of of the Alamo that they're kind of doing here.
Well, I mean, look, realistically, I think uh, I'm just trying to think. if any of these businesses said, "Hey, screw this, I'm going to operate outside of Texas," or even small businesses outside of Texas said, "Hey, I'm gonna call my business Alamo something just to piss these guys off," you know, it's back to the old. Well, if you want to sue me, go buy a plane ticket. Um, I just think that's like that's absolutely ridiculous. Like that's what if the not that I'm a big fan of waving flags around, but what if the United States government came along and said it's going to be now illegal for you to put the American flag on your products or sell anything that looks like the American flag without our express consent and blah blah blah. Like
It's kind of ridiculous, right? It's like in this case, it's like it's one of those instances where being patriotic is kind of going against the government, and it's really kind of ridiculous because it's those traditions have been owned by Texans and people around the world. When people say remember the Alamo, the idea is to remember all the different people from all over the world who came to this one spot to fight a tyrannical man. It's and just to kind of give my own background, I'm actually related to the third mayor of San Antonio, who actually was an Alamo defender. In fact, Jim Bowie and William Travis, when Travis being the commander of the fort, told him, "Well, you need to go. You need to take your family," because it was well known that Santa Anna would not just kill the rebel, but his whole family along with it if they were Tejano. So they asked him to leave, and he left. And so, this is a very personal issue to me and to a lot of people in this area, just because it is a representation of diversity that's really being kind of wiped away. And in fact, that's one of the big things that the Alamo Defenders Association has made very clear is that we make this known that the Tejanos fought there. That there were minorities there. Everyone else is saying that they're not, which just is not the case. There were plenty of them there. In fact, and they're still here. A lot of those people still have descendants. They had daughters and sons that stayed around in the area. I mean, my family's been here since, and I'm not going anywhere. So, to me, this is a special kind of structure, and the Alamo itself is there's so many issues because this is, right now I've just mentioned the idea of them spending 400 million, of them gentrifying the area to spend. I think also one of the other travesties is that they're going to be removing the first integrated buildings in San Antonio. And for those who don't know this, San Antonio actually has the largest Martin Luther King March in the nation. In fact, we typically have annually 300,000 people show up.
Wow.
And it's wonderful. If you've never been, it's great. I love it because it's a libertarian. At the end, they have like a festival with a bunch of commerce, and for us, libertarians, gotta love capitalism. Really helps the poor. And it's interesting seeing all those people out there selling their wares and their food and whatever they can just to get by, and it really makes a difference for them throwing this event. And they don't. That community here in San Antonio doesn't even know that's happening. This whole issue has been purposely downplayed. They hardly show it in the news. They try to make the people who do show up look like they're crazy, and they're most certainly not crazy. These people are very very much professionals. They have their own lives. So they're doing this. They're doing this because they're trying to make an issue out of it, and so that it stops. And I haven't even gotten to the wall they want to build around it. Yes, they want to build another wall.
Well, I mean, that was kind of the whole point of the Alamo, right? To be a fort, which is a wall. So I guess there's that.
Well, so here's the difference is that everyone says the Alamo was a fort. That's actually the biggest misconception. It was a mission. It was only used as a fort because if you've never been to San Antonio, especially during that time, there was nothing else around. There's no mountains. There's no defensible land. It's just a town with a river through it. That's really about it. And so you just kind of use the fort as a process. But there's so much history beyond just the Alamo battle that exists around this location. From my understanding, they'll be digging up the Indian burial grounds that are there. in order to kind of get this plan through. They'll also be the biggest issue is that they'll be moving the cenotaph. The cenotaph is the statue that took place in the middle. The descendants put without having the bodies. For those who don't know, the bodies were burned, and they put it right there in the middle. And the idea was this was going to mark the spot and kind of be used as a tombstone. So they want to move this marble structure. They won't tell any of us why they're wanting to move it. Yeah,
I wonder if this is like anything like, just kind of trying to erase history by removing statues, kind of thing that they were doing to all these Confederate statues.
Well, I think so. In some cases, from that actually happened to us not too long ago. Our city council is pretty liberal, and they removed the Travis statue. We had a park in Travis Park that was a Confederate monument. It was to the dead of the Civil War. It was removed overnight in the middle of the night with really no way to object. And for us, we think they actually broke it in the middle of the process. So, of course, we did find out at one of the meetings. It's actually in the basement of the Alamo Dome. Not the actual Alamo.
Yeah, for those who don't remember that. Wait, isn't there not supposed to be a basement in the Alamo?
No, Alamo Dome, not the Alamo. See, got you there. So it's it may be a way of kind of erasing some of this history here. And as much as I can, I'm trying to put a stop to it. I've been working with city councilors. I've been able to convince a couple of them in their votes. I actually do plan to have other people run for city council this upcoming May, and letting those who vote against us, especially on this project, I'm very much letting them know. And if they still don't know, you know now that I will run people against you, and I'm working with other groups to make sure that you have help the whole way through, so we can get some libertarian like-minded people who actually listen to the populace to prevent these things from happening.
Nice. So I want to ask you, I kind of want to get into a philosophical type discussion about this, actually. Because when I see this kind of stuff, I usually hear, the argument is, we want to take this old city that's, there's some parts of it that are falling apart, and there's some parts that have already been renovated on small pieces of property, but we want to turn this into like some really grand new city where everything is new and everything's like, we get rid of the old stuff and it's just nice. We replace the crappy stuff with the nice stuff. And in doing so, there's people they've been living in the same house that's now 100 years old, and they haven't been improving it, and it's an eyesore to the rest of the city that's all modern hotels and whatever. So I guess like I'm kind of thinking, okay, that kind of mentality is okay, I get it. Like, you want something newer and nicer, right? We all do that, right? Our car gets old enough and it starts falling apart, and we want to get a new one. But so then they try to use this as an excuse to kind of kick people out and build on top of where other people own stuff that it's their home. They've been there forever and they don't want to get rid of it. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of like, okay, and I guess they start to blame. They almost start to demonize these people and say, oh, they're just holding out. They don't really have any interest in that land. Otherwise, that's why they haven't been taking good care of it. And, and blah, blah, blah. They're just holding on to it. They're just greedy. They want the money. They want, whatever. And at the end of the day, it's almost like, okay, but like, okay, you came here and everybody had like all these little properties around here. And then you decided you want to build this big city. And maybe you did a little bit with like some hotels and stuff, but if you wanted to build a whole new city where like you had access to all of the land and you could do whatever you wanted on all of it, like, shouldn't you just start in a new place? Like, didn't you kind of know that going in, that there were other people there, and at some point they might say, we don't want to build a big city and we own this land and there's no way for you to kick me off?
Well, I think it has a lot to do with the institutional problems that the city faces anyways. So I'm going to use San Antonio as an example because we have a massive gentrification problem here. So there's this area that's kind of near the Alamo where this stuff is happening called Dignity Hill. Now, this has been a particularly African American community, and I actually used to volunteer in that area. And a lot of these people are highly uneducated. They're living paycheck to paycheck, don't have much time because they're working some of the worst shifts available. And what these essentially companies do is they go in, they buy a couple properties and they fix them up and they sell them. No, I don't have a problem with that. Most of the time, that's not an issue. Okay, the main issue that starts attaching to it is the property tax issue, is because now you've increased the area. Just that are surrounding it, because let's say the comparables of your house, if this new guy sold his house for 160,000 and your house was only worth 100, well, now the taxes are saying it's worth 140, even though you haven't done any work to it.
Right.
And so they say you can go contest it, but here's the main issue. A lot of these people are uneducated. They don't know how to contest these things.
Right.
They don't know where to go. And that's the dilemma they face. And that's why I've always said that it's if you're looking at property taxes, I personally think property tax should always, it should be locked in. Once somebody buys the house, if we're going to deal with it, yes, of course, I most certainly would eliminate the property tax if I could.
Because taxation is what?
Taxation is theft. We all know it's theft. But if I have to, and that's the big thing I've always tried to tell a lot of libertarians is you have to deal with the system that's there in front of you. Our liberties were chipped away. You have to chip them right back. Don't expect for it to happen overnight. I wish it would happen overnight, but we've got to go out there and win these seats one by one. Yeah,
unless we get a whole lot more people to realize that taxation is theft, then maybe we can make it happen overnight. But yeah,
one day yeah. It'll happen. And so that's when you're talking about the kind of the philosophical nature of it, it's to me it's these people are just trying to find a way to make a living. But just because you don't take care of something, it doesn't mean you don't appreciate it or that I value it in the same way you do. I've known tons of people who live in a very kind of, I guess, kind of free lifestyle, as it were. They would rather live off the land than live in a traditional city kind of yuppie standard housing. And they don't live in the best kind of things. They kind of live almost in kind of like shack style types of housing, but they're happy. And at the end of the day, that's what it's about. It's about what makes you happy.
Yeah, and I've been to a lot of places around the world, and one thing I see is like, so here it's like okay, if you don't have like a nice house, and I'm talking about 4 walls and an air conditioner and a microwave. Like if you don't have that, it's like you're poor or you're missing out or someone owes you something. But I guess and like it's considered a necessity to have shelter, and like don't get me wrong, like shelter is good, and I'm not saying anyone should be without it, but it's almost like there are other places around the world where people are less focused on that. It's almost like the houses and apartments that we have now here are like like a shiny new boxy thing that you could buy in a store or see in a magazine. And if it's not, like there are people in other countries around the world that they'll build a shack, they'll build a box out of bricks and just call it a shelter, and that's good enough for them because they use it to sleep in it. And maybe it's because we have so many video games and like it's it's no longer a shelter, it's a game room. But maybe that's got something to do with it. But like I see so many people complaining about their living conditions here, when it's like there are people that have so much less than you and they still don't even consider themselves poor or homeless or or in poverty, just because it's not it's not quite necessity. It's you do need a little bit of shelter to survive the elements. but a little bit of extra sunshine is not necessarily going to kill you. I know Texas is a little bit different.
Yeah, well, Texas, it may actually kill you, so please be careful if you're here. Um, yeah, I was literally in Laredo, Texas, last year, and then 113. If you've never been out in 113, literally it dries off your sweat. So please, please don't. Please be prepared for that. Carry some water with you. Um, well, you know what? When you talk about kind of poverty, at least in that regards, for my own personal self, my family was pretty poor. I grew up in, I'll put it this way: we made too much to be accepted into any of the welfare programs, or we made too little to actually get ahead. Uh, and I think that's a common. It's becoming more and more common these days for that to happen. I've been seeing more and more families that I've been dealing with whenever I volunteer that are working paycheck to paycheck, and if they have one emergency, that's
They're
it.
out. Yeah.
Yeah. And they have to file bankruptcy, and sometimes it's not even by much. It's like a couple $100 that makes the difference. There's been a couple people where I've done that myself, and I'm sure there's others where I encourage it to you. Just ask somebody if, like, hey, do you need help? Like a couple $100, because most people can afford to sometimes help their neighbors with that kind of thing. And and I had to work my butt off. It's uh, I have now my master's and bachelor's degree in political science, and yes, I went through a political science program and came out a libertarian. Surprise, right?
Are
It
you
does
sure? Are you
happen.
sure you didn't go in like that as a mole or something?
No, no, no. Well, I actually I didn't start off as a libertarian. It was actually because of my teachers. So I went to the University of Texas at San Antonio, and we do have libertarian leaning teachers there. They're all variations and all very sorts. A lot of them are small L, if I were to say they were anything. But because they introduced me to these writings, that I never really got to experience elsewhere, it really changed my opinion and allowed me, I think, to grow. I wasn't. I always knew I was kind of a classic liberal, but I didn't know exactly where I really landed in today's modern spectrum. And definitely by the end of it was a unique surprise. Uh, and I think that had a lot to do with because my teachers didn't really uh, teach their opinion; they just taught what was there.
Yeah.
Which is kind of rare these
Yeah.
days.
It's well, I don't know. I think probably a lot of what I learned was I had a couple teachers who I think were the exception, who taught some interesting stuff. But yeah, for the most part, everybody else was just like, yeah, just read the book. Um,
Sure.
yeah, it's so. But anyway, that's going off topic. But
Yeah, a little bit.
so we were talking about how how you grew up, and I guess you were talking about how you had to work your way through to pay off your college.
Hmm. Oh, definitely. Yeah, I mean that was something I experienced in San Antonio. I stayed at home with my parents. I worked full time. I went to school full time, and some days it just wasn't enough. I mean, I remember. I still lived the typical college life of eating ramen.
Yeah.
I think most of us go through that at some point or another. It's kind of a trial, I think, that we kind of have to go through.
Yeah.
But that's a part about wealth accumulation. I mean, you have to learn how to struggle first. It begins to make you wiser with your money, and that's something. It gives you an incentive to be better at it.
Yeah. Definitely.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I actually have, it's like packed away now, but like I've got this dollar bill that was like my last dollar, that I saved like from, I don't know, maybe 10 or so years ago. But yeah, it's like you have to. I mean, like I like I moved out of my parents' house when I was about maybe 18. And the first thing I did was I moved. So I lived in Los Angeles where everything was like super expensive. So I moved up to the valley, and I moved in with, it was a 3-bedroom apartment, and I moved in with, I want to say like 3 roommates. One of them, there were two sharing one room. And, and, and then, and on top of that, I went and got a minimum wage job, and it was a struggle. We were all splitting the rent, and it was a struggle. And so and my parents were, they were doing pretty good, so more or less. They were always like, do you need any money, trying to offer me. And like, to me, I was like, no, I don't want, I don't want the money. Like, I want to figure out how to make things work on my own. I was kind of like forcing myself into that. And like, I know, like, I felt like really shitty sometimes, and I was like, just take the money, because like, you're screwed. And I got into credit card debt, and I even started, I saw documentaries of like people who were, these bill collectors were chasing them, and eventually, like, some of these people were committing suicide, and I was like, holy shit, this is insane. But then, like, all of this, like, because I kind of stuck to that, like, no, I need to figure my own way out of this. It forced me to kind of like grow and realize, okay, one, get out of this shitty job. Either
Yeah.
get promoted, or get out of this shitty job and find something else. And people have accused me of white privilege for doing that, but no, there were like the
Mm.
jobs that I moved out from there were other than white people working there, black and Hispanic. Like, that's actually the some of the managers that I was working for were Indian. So it, okay, I'm not gonna say white privilege doesn't exist, but like, there are opportunities available,
So,
but it's, you
so
have to want it. Like,
no,
like
you
I
most certainly do. Uh,
like
uh, Go ahead,
I,
Adrian.
I never pushed myself to get out of that minimum wage job until I started looking at my check and saying, well, shit, my credit cards keep going up because I've been using them to buy food, and I'm like, I can't make all, like, it doesn't add up. Like, I need to get the hell out of this job. And it wasn't until that point where I said, okay, you know what, fuck this. I'm gonna see what else there is. And I moved up to something that was $10 an hour, and then I had some random luck give me some other opportunities too, which, yeah, everyone might not get those, but you got to push yourself.
Mhm.
But yeah, it's that feeling, like, I guess that's what I was getting at. It's that feeling of being broke, and
Oh yeah.
not having not having anything to fall back on, that really makes you get up and say, okay, this is it. Either I'm gonna die, or I'm gonna get up and do something and survive.
Well, even if you do everything right, I try to tell people from my own personal experience is that there's no guarantee you're going to be successful. I think that's I've met a lot of liberals who want the equal, not just opportunities but the outcomes. And I've as I'll just guys, I'll tell you my personal story a little bit more. So when I was working school full time, and going to work at the same time, I met a friend, and we became real close, and she was just really a one of the most wonderful people I've ever met. In fact, she helped me a lot and was a real good part of my network. Well, uh, she did everything by the book too. She went to work, and unfortunately, one day somebody came in and took her life. And that was, to me, that's such a serious issue. In fact, I've had to deal with that multiple times being here in the city of San Antonio, which is why I think I became even more involved. Just because it's like, here I was doing all these right things. I've never been one for drugs. I'll support your freedom to do whatever you want. I really do believe in the legalization of all drugs, but I've never touched them myself. I went to school full time, went to work full time, but I got in a small period of time, I got robbed. I had two friends murdered. My store that I was working at didn't get backed in by a truck not once but twice. And my Jeep top was, I don't know if I mentioned my Jeep top being stolen. It was a multitude of things over the course of like 4 or 5 years. And I'm just like, what the hell am I doing wrong? And it took me a long time to realize that a lot of this anger or desperation that when people commit these type of acts, it's when they lack agency. It's at the end of the day, it's when they lack freedom, when they feel that they can't actually make a good choice, or they don't have a way out. They get desperate, and that's when the anger and the violence and everything else comes out. So when I see those type of things happen, it's become very clear to me that it has a lot to do with the amount of regulation and control that is placed on our lives, and people don't want that. They want to be able to live the life the way they see fit, and I think as a good, especially somebody running for office as a representative, that's our job, is to help facilitate, not to control, but to facilitate, to help you guys find a way and get access to better things, but without hurting anybody in the process. Hence the whole the idea. I mean, really, as your hat says there, Daniel, taxation is theft. It's just that's the very basis of it, and that's a place to start. It's not the place to finish, but it is most certainly a place to start.
Yeah,
So
it's and well, I kind of want to disagree with you on something that you said, but at the
oh, go
same
for it.
time, I think it's also true because of the environment that we're in. But so you said, not everybody's going to be successful, and I guess that's, that, I mean, that alone can be subjective as to what do you mean
Of
by
course, but
successful.
sexual, yeah, of course.
Um, but but I really do think anyone can be very successful if they just keep trying. Like I've seen. I actually kind of call I call real estate an idiot's game, and this is why Trump, who I don't think is the most intelligent person in the world, was able to make billions of dollars in real estate. Like it really is kind of a no brainer, and I know there's a bar of entry because of so you need whatever kind of finances to get in. Um, but I've seen some people who, you look at them and you're like, this person's not gonna really. This person's, they're missing a screw. They're, not the brightest light bulb in the box. Whatever. And they make good money in real estate or some other, buy low, sell high. Buying light bulbs from China and selling them to, what, like I've seen so many people do so many different amazing things. You don't have to be super smart to be
Oh no.
successful. Really, like what happens, like when I see this happen to people, it's mostly just because it's not even that they have a specialized skill. It's just that they're driven. Like they're driven, and they're not like, and they try a few things and they fail and they fail and they fail, and they just keep trying because they're like, this is all I've got, and I'm gonna do it until I succeed at something. And so I think anybody really can, but at the same time, like I think a lot of what you were saying is true. Like, you have people who are in poor neighborhoods where, let's say even uh, their incomes are a little bit lower in this neighborhood.
Hmm.
um, their property taxes might still be the same. Their vehicle registration is still going to be the same. Their income tax is still going to be hurting them. The cost of gas is probably going to be the same. And like so you have all these things, and then when you look at how many of these things are expensive because of government, oh, let's not even talk about healthcare. Where like you were saying, if people are living paycheck to paycheck, and then something, they get a cold. Dave Chappelle was making a joke the other night about how back in the day, if you get diarrhea, that was it. Your life's over. You're gonna die.
Yeah, you're done.
And it's like it's funny because like it's there are some people that to if you live in a nice neighborhood, someone gets a cold, it's like, okay, just lock yourself in your room and drink some tea and you'll be good. But there are some people who you know it's not maybe necessarily that easy, because maybe the quality of the water they're drinking is not going to help them recover. Because maybe it's dirty water, especially you live in like Flint, Michigan. There's so many factors to this that the money does play a huge part in, I guess, your survivability. And when government's sitting there taking so much of it away from you, and then of course they're blaming it on other people. Oh, you're poor because of the rich people.
Oh yeah, of
Um,
course.
like no, like the people like in the wealthier neighborhood next door, they're not coming to your neighborhood and taking food out of your mouth. They're not taking money out of your paycheck. It's government that's doing all this. They're not the ones who are saying we're going to charge you an arm and a leg. Like I man, down here in Mexico, there is in the poorest neighborhoods, They have doctors on the corner next to a farm. There's pharmacies everywhere. First of all, they have doctors on the corner next to the pharmacy, and I got a little infection in my eye, and I went there for them to check it out, and they charged me 50 pesos to give me a prescription, which the prescription wasn't even required because it was just like, this is what you need.
Oh,
And then maybe I spent 100 pesos on like some eye drops and some kind of cream or something, antibiotic. And that's all it costs.
well,
And there's no AMA and like, oh, you got to go through 8 years of school, blah 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 blah, to become a doctor to tell someone like what kind of cream to rub in their eye.
yeah, in most cases, it's not that difficult. I always love giving the best example of corporatism using the government as a way of facilitating their own particular needs. My glasses. Most glasses out of the United States come from one company, even the different brands that are available.
Right.
Well, since the prevalence of the internet, there's been other companies around the world that popped up that have allowed others to buy glasses. This pair cost me $7. It's prescription glasses. I don't buy them here in the States. And so many times, what I do is I just go through the eye exam and then I'll buy it online. But the best part is when I used to work for the nonprofit, a nonprofit here in San Antonio called SA Youth. I would actually sit down with the moms and dads with their kids that had eye problems. Okay, well, there's already this service that'll give you a free eye exam and they'll give you one pair of glasses. That's fine. We'll go ahead and do that. But then we're going to take your prescription, and now we're going to go buy these glasses online. So he can break as many of them as you want at $6 a pop. You don't have to worry about paying a couple $100 every time one breaks. So we're just going to buy them 20. Is that cool? And they're like, yeah, that's great. I solved their whole dilemma just because there was a free market choice. There was a choice. And that's what people really crave, is to being able to, it's always tell people, most of the poor that I've encountered, they're not poor because they're not diligent, or most of them work extremely hard. You're right. It's a systemic problem. They don't know these choices are out there because there's nobody, their schools that they're required to go to that supposedly are giving you good education,
Right.
aren't really teaching people actually how to functionally make their lives better. It took someone like me, a volunteer, to come in and actually tell them, okay, these are the resources you need to go. This is where you need to go do it. You can find other options. It's about, being able to research and make those decisions for yourself. And, that's the biggest thing. It's, if you have a choice, people will generally make the better choice. They just need to know about it.
Yeah.
That's the biggest thing, and our government doesn't try to do that by any means. It functionally does not work that way.
And
That's the hardest part I communicate to people.
here's a really interesting example of that too. And this one, I mean, it's not even much of a choice, but so I told you I've been through the struggle where I'm like, okay, I gotta, like, I can't pay these bills. I need to do something. And one of the things that I learned is I learned, first of all, you don't have to pay your credit cards.
No.
They're not gonna come and throw you in jail. And this was really like an amazing revelation to me, because like, as simple as that sounds and as obvious as it is, like, people have killed themselves over debt collectors, and I've been subjected to them, and like, I've heard their shit on the phone, and they make you feel really fucking bad, and like, they make you think they're like, someone's gonna come and break your legs. But so once I realized, like, okay, wait, I don't have to pay this, and like, basically fuck those guys. So then I got like a ticket, and I'm going to court, and I'm like, and I already know, like, I'm starting to learn, like, this whole system of like traffic courts is a scam. And like, so I start like, okay, let me push the limits on this thing. Now, normally what happens is you go to court. This is in California, so I know Texas, every state's a little bit different.
Of course.
But what they do is they want to get your money first, so that when you go and you lose, they don't have to fight you for it. So they tell you, look, if you want to plead not guilty, yeah, sure, go try. Maybe the cops, they'll encourage you to go fight your ticket and think that you might win. But you got to pay them up front first. And like, it's just like, oh yeah, you might get your money back, but it makes you feel better about giving it to them, right? But then at one point I was like, well, I know how this works. I've been through this. Like, your judge isn't going to listen to me. He's not going to give me my money back. So what happens if I refuse to give you my money? And, they went back and forth with me, and they tried to insist, no, you got to pay us today. And I said, what if, and because at first I was saying, what if I don't want to pay you? And they were saying, you have to pay us. And then I said, what if I don't have the money and I can't pay you? And that, only then is when they came and said, oh, well, there's another option. Really? And it's like, okay, so like you're the only person here that knows, that most of the people who come into this office are completely ignorant, as I was, of, what's actually required here. Nobody knows the law. Nobody knows, like, even if they write the law on the ticket that you violated, nobody knows like the plethora of laws that surround that law that make that law valid. And you're basically telling me, okay, if I don't know the options coming in here, you're not going to tell me, and you're basically just going to try to screw me out of it. And that's kind of like right what you were saying. It's like people think like being educated means you went to college. Man, do you know how many lawyers I've talked to that don't know this stuff about basic traffic court? And like I say basic traffic court because like everyone's gotten a ticket at some point in their lives.
Of course.
And nobody knows, not even the lawyers know how the system operates, but it's like the handful of people that actually work in the court, they're just sitting there all day trying to figure out what do you say to people to make them give up their money, and how do I make my job easier to take your money? And they're just screwing all of us.
Well, it's kind of funny. You mentioned the education bit. I'm a firm believer of that. You do not need to go to school to be educated. I've known plenty of people. In fact, one of my best friends is a manager at McDonald's, but he's just as educated on political topics as I am. Somebody who went to school and has their master's degree in the topic. And it's just because we sit, we discuss, and we go over these things. We'll assign each other books to read, and just because we enjoy doing that as friends. And he is one of the best intellectuals I know out there, and he works on McDonald's, and not being able to use that ability because we associate so much into this degree, when, to be frank, they just don't mean as much as they used to anymore, because we all know the government subsidies has kind of ruined the whole college education system.
Right.
Which is a whole nother issue. Now I tell people I have my master's degree. They're like, oh, that's great. And I'm like, yeah, the problem is now a master's degree is more like an old bachelor's degree. And your bachelor's degree now equivalent to a high school degree. And that was actually some of the things that I typically face. And I tell people, no, going to school is just, it's not really worth it unless you really want to work in academia. If you want to work in academia, go to school, do that type of work. But if not, there's other things to do. The government has messed it up so much, and the best thing that they could do is just step away. But unfortunately, I find that most government officials, they're too prideful to admit when they're wrong. And it's maybe it's just the attitude that gets attracted to power, I guess. In most cases, because a lot of these people that I meet, they're just so arrogant, and they think they know, and it's so arrogant enough they don't show up. So like San Antonio, we have a public meeting. It's every week typically. It's called Citizens to be Heard, and this allows the citizens of San Antonio to go in front of all the council members and the mayor, and to say their piece, and then they respond back. Well, I went to one to go talk about the Alamo and the cenotaph, and there were 3 council members there, 3 out of 11 people. And to me, that's just kind of pathetic, and I think that's kind of the nature of
that's you just witnessed the truth of what they really care about, what you say.
Yeah, I'm like, okay, and I've seen it several times. They'll grab one of these, their cell phone, and they'll just sit there. And we've got tons of pictures, but they really don't care.
Yeah, no, sorry, I'll
Go,
let you
go ahead.
finish.
No, it's just it's this thing just happens to be more and more frustrating, and it's there's so many issues to be tackled. I think what's been kind of cool running for office is because people will ask me all the time, like, well, how can I help? And I'm like, well, what issue matters to you? And sometimes they go, well, there's a lot of issues. And I go, well, exactly. So pick one and just try to work on that one issue. And that'll help more than often because then you become that person that everybody knows for that one issue, and then all that all that information will just start going towards you. I couldn't tell you the amount of
Yeah.
information I've got on gentrification and the Alamo and all these kind of things associated with it just because I'm running for this office. It's been kind of neat, actually.
That's a really good point because actually when I ran for the Texas House
Hmm.
in District 125, which is in like northeast northwestern San Antonio, and my main issue was legalizing weed and stopping police misconduct. And exactly like you're saying, like people started coming to me with all of their stories and issues with police misconduct, and I met some amazing people, but it was almost like I kind of became like a beacon for this issue that
Hmm.
nobody had before because there wasn't an or there, well, so the marijuana thing there was normal, um,
Hmm.
but for the police misconduct thing it was like no one really took that on and said I want to lead this project. So that was actually really big. So I would even say like, and I know like there are people out there with like you've got some little like specific niche issue that you care about. There's I'm working with Desiree Lindsay, and she's
Oh,
got
Desert.
free the shrooms now, and
Good for her.
yeah, and she's it's not as popular as legalizing weed yet, but she's really kind of like into this journey where she's learning about psychedelics and what they can actually like how
And
powerful
help
they are.
people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so she wants to create a movement to legalize shrooms, and so now she started that, and now people are coming to her exactly like you said. So if to anyone, no matter who you are, like
Well,
I don't care if it's pineapple on pizza. Um, it's like stand up and say something about what you want to change, and you will get support for it. I guarantee you, because there's so many people that are they're just sitting there waiting for something to change, and they're feeling the same pain as you, but they're afraid to speak up because they think they're alone. But as
oh,
soon as you
exactly.
stand up and say it, like they're gonna start coming to you and say, "Hey, let's team up because now I realize I'm not alone." It's like you become like a little support group of a small issue, and then it grows, and then things change.
I'll give you an example of this. I mean, we were talking about, a little bit about the police misconduct here in San Antonio. One of the we have had some of these issues lately, and so when I ran for city council last in 2017, I sat down with their political action committee, which is held up by police members here in town, and I'm sitting down, and they go, well. Right now, being a police officer gets a really bad rap. What would you do to recruit? And they go to me, and I just look at them, and I just straight up say, it's like, well, you're asking me, but what would you do? And they all just looked around and started laughing, and I'm like, well, what's funny? They go, in our whole time, never has anybody running for city council literally asked us what we would do. And they go, the first thing we would want is more training because they mention the issue of misconduct in these things because they want they do want these things. They just don't know how to get it because they're they're not finance majors. They're not any of those things. They're police officers. I always tell people police is the uh, when we start having issue with police, it's because they're the most visible part of government. It's uh, but police officers enforce the laws that are created. They don't create the laws. That's your legislatures. That's your politicians. So if when you, I always tell people if they don't associate with big government, and bigger government oversight from legislation, they most certainly should, because that's why you have your major problem. Most of the guys that I've met, at least in my time here, they're like, no, we would love our training, we'd love to get to meet people, we'd love to go out there. They just don't know how to do it. A lot of times these resources that we wish were available for them, nobody's making it. And once again, they've made it an issue. We've made it an issue here just because I've worked with those organizations where I found out that a lot of them were totally for the legalization of marijuana and other types of things, because they're like, yeah, we hate arresting people because it makes people hate us. And we know that it's a stupid law because it doesn't actually affect anyone. Most of the guys that they know that are smoking, they're like, yeah, they just sit home. They eat a bag of Doritos. They're not going anywhere.
Right.
We've all heard this story again and again and again, and it's getting repeatable to a point where it's just like, okay, we got to move on this and just make this type of stuff stop.
So this is something that keeps coming up, and like, it's so like, I get that they're not the ones who make the laws, but at the same time, what's to stop them from just saying, okay, I'm not going to arrest you?
Well, a lot of times it's because of the particular pressure that they face from the political organizations that are around. If a lot of our police officers some of them can make the personal decision. There are some issues they can. I've known sheriffs that instead of taking people away for driving while intoxicated, they basically just throw them in a drunk tank till they sober up. That is personal responsibility. They're like, and some of the guys that I met, their thought process on it was, why am I going to ruin somebody's whole life because we've made this thing to an extent, even though there's no victim yet. And I'm not saying go drunk. I am not saying to go drink and drive.
Right.
Take an Uber, please. Take an Uber, taxi cab, something. But the point is that they knew, because of all this harsh regulation that now existed with it, that if they didn't throw this person in the drunk tank and just to let them sober up, that was it for them. And some of them do make those personal decisions, and so it's a case by case basis. That's why it's hard for me to label all of police good or bad, because I think it comes down to the individual level again. Some people are good and are going to try to do the right thing by people. Others are not. They're gonna ream into you, and they're gonna abuse what the law is for. And to me, when you're doing that, that's the most dishonorable thing that you can do. I think you say you swore to protect the people, you're literally going against them the moment you do that. And it's I really wish there was a better way to separate the two. I think self-governance is most certainly a better issue. I think the population, when something wrong happen, that they can handle it better. But that at the same time, due process. The system is supposed to protect us, but unfortunately, it's gotten so complicated that I think most people don't know how to protect themselves from this abuse that exists, which I think is, something I've always wanted to start, is to what I call constitutional classes, so I can go into low income areas and literally just teach people how to defend themselves from what I would think is just this horrendous abuse that exists.
Right.
Because some areas are bad. They're really, 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 really bad. And I'm glad I don't live in those areas. My heart goes out to those people.
Yeah, it's man. Yeah, there's I mean,
it's a
yeah, there's so many screwed up things, but it's I mean, I don't know. Anywhere you go in the world, there's your environment is always a problem. Some are worse than others. Some problems are caused by people, some are caused by nature, but it's it's one of those things you got to kind of either adapt or move, or but then there's the same way there's other often people standing in your way from preventing you from being able to do that. So
no, definitely. And okay, so you mentioned nature. We can give a great example of that. So one of the things the General Land Commission Office actually deals with is the coastline. So it actually like I said earlier, controls up to 10 miles out compared to other places. Most states only have 2 miles because Texas was its own nation and has up to 10. And so we'll put in the oil fields. But one of the other things that the General Land Commission office does is handles the dispersion of funds after a particular event, like how we had in this last hurricane. Now, I'm sure plenty of you saw across the nation Hurricane Harvey. And the damage that it did to the Houston area and also to the Rockport area where the eye would first hit land. Um, so FEMA disperses its funds, and it's the GLO's job to then disperse it to the people. Now, okay, first of all, I'm not saying that I'm arguing for this free handouts, but one thing I try to remember is that sometimes a lot of these handouts are the only way that these people are ever going to reclaim their stolen money. So I want to make sure they get it. If you're taking my money on the preconceived notion that it's supposed to help people, I'm going to make sure that that's where it goes to and not to some corporate entity or to line someone's pocket. Like, just to me,
Right.
that's if you're going to steal it, I'm going to make sure it's going to be stolen for the right reasons. That's a hard thing to kind of accomplish sometimes. But this is one of those cases where it shouldn't have been. And so a lot of these people, they plan kind of even with their insurance and things like that. Um, those funds were supposed to be dispersed as a way of kind of dealing with the issues at hand until they can get things repaired. Because when you have an incident like that, the market around there isn't designed to handle the rebuilding of a whole city. This is a natural disaster. You have to fly people in from all over the place, which is another thing we've had since the prevalence of immigration. There hasn't been enough workers to fill the need that's in those areas. So,
Thanks, Trump.
yeah, we can get in that. Thanks. So people are still their homes almost a year later where it's still destroyed. And these people would love to go back into the areas. In fact, some of these areas are the most visited by Texans as far as the beach goes, and it's the houses are torn in half. They're missing. And it's not that they're not being worked on. The city is they're working around the clock to get some of these things back up and running because that's how these people make their living. But unfortunately, the market hasn't been able to fix itself because we're preventing the market from working. So that's a whole immigration issue at play here. But I would like to say is that if I was in charge of the GLO, I'd definitely make sure those people get their stolen money back. That's my main thing. So
Yeah.
it's a hard, for us libertarians, it's a lot. We get accused a lot of not having a heart, which is just not the case. I think some of the libertarians I've met have been willing to give you, their shirt off their back at any time. It's
Yeah,
if you're in need, they'll come out and help.
and that's something I like to kind of focus on is that it's true, like the way we present libertarianism is you know oh, but what about and then pick your people who are in some sort of trouble. What about them? And then it's like, well, don't steal, don't steal to give them anything. And that's kind of, and it comes off like, yeah, we don't care about them. But the reality is, just like you said, no, we want to help them. We just want to find a way to do it that doesn't involve stealing. What's so wrong with that? um,
Well, and I was mentioning to you earlier that this is why I recommend people to kind of function the way the General Land Commission office. So now I tell anybody whenever they say, well, what about those people? Oh, well, I would create a permanent fund the way that the General Land Commission works that will hold assets and principals instead of taxing people, and we'll use the interest to help those people out. No taxation involved. And they look at me like, what? How does that work? Well, if you knew how finances and economics work, you would understand. But uh, I think that's another problem we have is trying to get people to understand basic math. Um, it's
yeah.
I think my favorite experience is always going up to any type of legislator or council member, and whenever they say, "Well, I'm all about economic development," and they go, "Can you name the name of the three economic theories that exist today?" The
Well,
answer.
there's print money, there's borrow money. What's the third one? What's it called? Quantitative easing. I think that's the third one. Oh no, is that a combination of the first two?
Oh man.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you could expect their reaction. They don't like me very much sometimes. So I always say I know I'm doing it right when they're getting pissed off. That's
Yeah.
somebody's got to piss them off. I think might as well be me.
Man. All right. Well, let's. I want to start wrapping this up, but do you have a website? Anything you want to give for anyone to go check out, or are you looking for any donations or volunteers that anyone can help out with?
Well, so you can go to my website. It's mattpina.com. That's Pina. Yes, it is pineapple. If you didn't know that, but you can go to mattpina.com. You can also go on Facebook and look me up, Matt Pina for Texas Land Commission. I do have a Twitter account, which is actually linked to my Facebook too, so they're pretty easy to find. As far as donations and volunteers, yes and yes, I need both. This is probably one of the best chances of actually getting a libertarian elected at a statewide level that we've had in a while. The issue of the Alamo has been so controversial that actually George P. Bush, who's the current General Land Commission owner, he had over at their state convention, they had 6,000 Republican leaders show up. Over 5,000 voted against his plan, and yet he's still going through with it. Um, so just the tenacity of this guy is ridiculous. And so there's a lot of Republicans that actually have been coming out to me straight, like, "Hey, if we vote for you, would you put a stop to this?" So I'm like, "Most certainly, 400 million project, yeah, I'd put a stop to it. To me, that's a real big waste of money. There's so many better things if you were going to spend it, you could do on the GLO, because remember, this money doesn't come from taxation; it's its own funds. That they could certainly do better things with it. So yeah, of course, that in a heartbeat, because there's so many traditions and things there, and what I really remind people is the Alamo is a beacon across the world to those who really need hope, and it's one of those reminders, and that's what makes what makes it so very sacred to the people of Texas. But if you're really interested in some of these issues that go on, or maybe some of the other things that the General Land Commission does, like the Veterans Board, it's one of those other things that helps a lot of veterans out. You can always follow me. You can communicate. I'm very open with communication. In fact, if you send me a message, I will respond back to you personally. I do not like things being filtered through other people, because at the end of the day, I really do believe a representative is supposed to represent people's voice. And I always say, if Abraham Lincoln can meet there and meet with people all day during a civil war, I most certainly can do that running during peacetime. So,
Yeah.
uh, you
Man.
know, it's
And
just a
and
perspective.
you're pretty active with the Bear County LP, right?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Still, I mean, our LP here is it's actually pretty good. We've got a pretty good organization. Actually, I want to give a shout out to my good friend Tony Valdivia. He's running for a special election in State Senate District 19. The previous office holder was a Democrat named Uretzi, who was arrested for fraud. Uh, Go figure. He was
Surprise, surprise.
surprised. His brother is now running. So I guess keeping it in the family, right?
Yeah.
Uh, but Tony has actually done a very good job. He's actually hit up over 7,000 homes in the area. So we're hoping a good turnout. The vote is tomorrow. In this, it only took place over a month. So you really had to get your name out there as much as
Yeah.
possible during this 1 month period. It was super stressful, but we did a lot of work. So we'll be excited to see what happens, and this is why I say Tony's done a good job about bridging gaps too. So the group Our Revolution actually ended up endorsing him, which was very surprising. for those who don't know our revolution, these guys are kind of more democratic socialists, I guess, but they're pretty progressive on some of their issues. Well, they endorsed him because he was the only candidate that actually went to a Pride Fest. He's the only one actually going out to these areas, saying what we typically say as libertarians. It's like, no, we accept you no matter what you were. And at the end of the day, they're like, well, he's the only one who did that. So yeah, of course, we're going to support that over everything else, because if you're unwilling to do those things, you're never going to listen to us otherwise. So, I give them props there for that. It was very much a surprise and shock to us, because uh, we weren't expecting that group to endorse a libertarian, to say the least. So good for them. Maybe they're finally understanding taxation is theft, right?
Yeah, maybe.
Maybe. I don't know about that one. I will say this though before I forget. So I ended up coming across this one thing. So Karl Marx's hometown actually put out this euro of a dollar of a euro. Okay, for those to see it, can you see what it's worth there? $0.
Nice.
So I bought a couple. And I'm actually going to be giving them out if you share and like my page, and I'll be posting something later this week. But for those who don't know, Daniel has a particular stamp that's made for dollar bills. So I have mine over at a friend's right now, but I'm going to stamp it. And so if you like to share my page, you'll get a nice Karl Marx saying taxation is theft. So
nice.
Just be prepared.
You
and
finally
you can
learned after all this time.
Just took him years to realize that his money was worth nothing. I had to buy it the moment I found out that town put out $1 worth $0.
Hey, as soon as I found out where to get them, I went and bought some of those $100 trillion bills from Zimbabwe.
Oh, there you go. It's fun, right? Have fun with see,
these are better collectibles than anything the U.S. has ever printed out. So
yeah, that's true. We put out stamps.
Yeah. Oh man.
So
I don't
know if there's anything you want to cover, Daniel, but thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's been great talking with you. And good luck with your election. If there's anything I can do to help you out and help spread the word. And again, if you live in San Antonio or actually anywhere in Texas and you're interested in volunteering or donating to help Matt out, definitely hit him up through his Facebook page. And taxation is theft.
Taxation is most certainly theft.